In an age when technology strives to minimize our dependence on natural resources, a growing number of fiber artists are turning to a new and exciting source of color. The mushroom, found in forests and grasslands worldwide, has gathered a new following due to this hidden use that was only recently discovered. In January of 1988, the 4th International Fungi and Fiber Symposium was held near the coastline of Northern California at the Mendocino Biological Field Station. The location provided not only a natural setting for the exchange of ideas, but forests full of mushrooms. Among the organizers of the symposium was Miriam C, a sculptor and art instructor who has worked with natural dyes for over 20 years. In 1971, she discovered a mushroom that yielded a yellow pigment. Continuing her experiments, Miriam found that it was possible to obtain an extraordinary array of colors using a simple process in which the mushrooms are heated in water. What intrigued her was not only the visual impact of the colors, but the resilience of the dyed fibers to washing and sunlight. Miriam shares her discoveries with all who are interested, inspiring many artists to use fungi for color dyes. She and her colleagues have developed a new use for an old friend of mankind. Mushrooms, long known in culinary, poetic, and mystical worlds, have a new use that may prove to be their most exotic. They are the source of a brilliant spectrum of color. Miriam enjoys working with the many varieties of fungi, searching for pigments that are otherwise unobtainable. She is inspired by the range of beautiful colors and the magical quality of the process.
A very exciting time was when I found the red for the first time. I had a little skein of red of about 2 or 3 inches, and I had it in my hand and walked over to the art center and showed it to the textile people that were there at the time. It was truly a moving moment. I just kept trying everyone I could. I didn't know which ones they were, what their names were, but there were pots going all the time, all over the house. And I didn't think to keep records at first. I didn't even have any idea that it would be worthwhile to. But gradually I began to try to, in order to duplicate and to know which mushroom was doing what, I had to begin to record it.
In 1980, Miriam wrote Mushrooms for Color, a book that details which mushrooms provide what colors and gives guidelines for experimentation. Her book and ongoing classes have inspired a growing number of artists to begin working with this new medium. Miriam's research established that fungi are a reliable and predictable source of natural dyes. The Mendocino Art Center and the Mendocino County Museum sponsored an exhibition in which mushroom dyeing was introduced to the public. For the first time, the large spectrum of colors available from fungi were displayed in detail. Miriam's work was used as a basis for the show, and documentation from other researchers was included that confirmed her experiments. The portable exhibit was organized as an educational tool, presented at textile schools and museums throughout the United States. Graphic information was displayed with explanations of the techniques involved, together with yarn samples that showed specific steps in the process and the range of obtainable colors. An important part of the exhibit were the first artistic works created with mushroom-dyed yarn, including handmade apparel and woven tapestries. The annual Mushroom Festival at the Mendocino Headlands State Park continues to introduce the public to Miriam's work. Visitors attending the exhibit at the Park Center have seen samples of dyed fiber and have observed demonstrations in which Miriam boils pots of mushrooms and yarns. Surrounding her are fine pieces of artwork created solely with fibers dyed with fungi. Miriam considers herself a researcher and is involved only in experimentation with the pigments, while many of her colleagues are fiber artists who are actively using the yarns dyed with mushrooms in their work. Miriam explains what she is doing and tells how she developed her broad knowledge of mushrooms and their colors.
The San Francisco Mycological Society was extremely helpful to me. I knew that they had fairs in the city, so I went down to them and would check out what they said, what they had named a particular mushroom that I had up here, and in that way built up a slight knowledge of them, practical one.
After attending many mushroom exhibits as a researcher, Miriam was invited to participate and display her work at the various mushroom fairs in Northern California. This was where a large audience learned of the dramatic color possibilities with mushroom dyes.
I guess it was doing the fairs, being there, showing them. It was rather interesting. Many people would wonder what we were doing there. They still didn't believe it. They would see reds and blues and oranges and purples and greens, and they'd still say, well, all you get from the mushrooms brown. And they're looking at them, but they could hardly still believe it. So I think it spread basically through the people interested in mushrooms who came to see the fairs.
Mushrooms are the spore-producing fruit of fungi. Most of them appear in autumn, when temperature changes and increasing moisture stimulate the mycelium, the unseen portion of the mushroom, to develop and eventually appear. Fungi play an integral role in the eco-cycle of the forest. They break down decaying material and provide food for new growth. After at least 2 inches of rainfall, mushrooms begin to grow in the forest. As they appear, a new kind of mushroom hunter can be found searching for appropriate specimens. Because some mushrooms are poisonous when ingested, keep them out of the reach of small children and caution older children and adults concerning the dangers of eating any unidentified mushroom. Conversely, hunting for dye mushrooms can be an interesting and exciting outdoor activity. Having searched the woodlands near her home for many years, Miriam knows where to find species of mushrooms she has found previously. She always leaves some unpicked specimens in the area to ensure the spreading of spores to produce next year's crop. Searching through unexplored regions of the forest, she takes great pleasure in finding new mushrooms with which to experiment. Although Miriam will dry some for future use, the excitement of the color potential of an unknown species prompts her to dye with the mushrooms upon arriving home.
Dyeing with mushrooms is very simple. You want to chop them up if they're easily chopped, shred them, even grate them if they're hard, and just put them in water and let them simmer. The rule of thumb is 1 hour for the dye bath and 1 hour with the material to be dyed. So it's roughly a 2-hour process. The variable will be the quantity of pigment. So it is not necessarily the size of the mushroom that is important. It's the content, the pigment content of the mushroom. And as an example of that, there's a large mushroom called Hydnum imbricatum, which gives a lovely blue, but it has very little pigment in it in comparison to a little tiny one that's called Cortinarius, Phoenicius variety occidentalis, and it has a lot of pigment in it, but it is very small.
Mushroom dyes work best with protein fibers. Wool is the most commonly used material. Wool yarns, either store-bought or home-spun, can be tied into skeins, rinsed, and then put directly into the dye bath. More often, they are simmered in a mordant bath for an hour and then washed. Mordants commonly used in natural dyeing are metallic salts in powder form: iron, tin, alum, chrome, and copper. They help the pigment bind to the wool, thus varying the color potential of each mushroom. A numbering system identifies the mordant used to ensure maintenance of organized results and consistent color throughout the process. Within a few years of the publication of Miriam's book, interest had spread internationally. For example, enthusiasts were going out into the forests of Sweden, collecting mushrooms and extracting color dyes. Most had learned of this new process through Carla and Eric Sundström. Inspired by Miriam's work, they proceeded to research the subject further and wrote a book on mushroom dyeing that has been translated into German. Their influence has spread the art of mushroom dyeing throughout Northern Europe.
Among all the results Miriam listed, there were all the really interesting colors like purple and red. She had listed as Cortinarius unidentified. So that was a mystery that really begged to be solved.
And as soon as we saw that, he said, "Oh, I've just been reading about a Cortinarius that has so much pigment that it has pigment both in the cells and outside the cells in the plasma. It must be that one."
Yeah.
And since it was mushroom season, we ran out into the forest and collected some, and we tried Miriam's experiments, and then we were able to tell her the name of the species she was getting.
We found out that to be a good dye, to be used with these primitive methods, the dye has to be water soluble. It has to be able to swim around in the water, and it has to bind harder to the fiber than it once did to the mushroom. We found out that most of these dyes, they are acid dyes. The acid portions of the dye molecules will bite onto the amino groups of the fibers if we are using animal fibers like wool or silk or dog hair or rabbit hair. A good dye is one which starts out swimming around in the water and then suddenly bites on the fiber and stays there. And we found that many of the mushroom pigments were excellent in both respects and also gave beautiful colors.
The vivid and broad range of colors are certainly among the attractions that draw people towards mushroom dyeing. However, it was an interest in mushrooms in general that stimulated the curiosity of the first researchers. Subsequently, at international gatherings that have taken place in Sweden, Denmark, and the United States, the search for mushrooms and their identification have been of primary importance. At the 1988 California Symposium, the senior mycologist was Dr. Harry Tiers, professor of biology at San Francisco State University.
I think Miriam's book on the use of mushrooms in dyeing probably has done more to inform us of the activity that's going on. Here, my role is to serve more as the identifier of fungi. We've gone out every day, twice a day, and we've tried to go to different habitats because we know that different kinds of mushrooms are associated with different kinds of trees. This morning we were in a forest that had a mixture of firs and Douglas fir and tanbark oak, and this afternoon if we go out we'll go to largely a Douglas fir and pine forest. So we've had a lot of fun going out in the field and collecting a lot of fungi.
Many dye mushrooms were found, providing raw materials for those attending the symposium. Together with experts in the identification of fungi, there were mycologists who gave presentations on cultivating dye mushrooms and the chemistry involved in dyeing. Artists who have worked with the techniques in depth shared their experience with eager beginners. Their samples and notes from previous workshops offered a starting point for the current symposium. All who attended shared common interests in this developing dye technique, in learning the proportions and timing of well-proven formulas, in discovering and identifying new mushrooms with dye potential, and in working together with others in creating colorful yarns for use in artwork of a unique quality. It is the application of mushroom-dyed fibers that generates the greatest interest. Many artists who have preferred natural fibers and dyes are now incorporating yarns dyed with fungi into their work. Fungi pigments produce yarns with color tones that blend readily with each other. Weavers enjoy utilizing them in creating tapestries, shawls, blankets, and yardage for clothing. At the symposium, a group effort produced a tapestry woven with yarns dyed in former workshops. Although not a weaver herself, Miriam takes pleasure in seeing the end results of her accomplishments. With the introduction of this new medium, an increasing number of artists are inspired to use their talents to create mushroom-dyed apparel and other works of art. In conjunction with the symposium, the 4th International Mushroom-Dyed Fiber Art Show was opened to the public. The pieces on display revealed the beauty of one of nature's hidden secrets. One of the most recent developments displayed at the exhibit is the use of mushrooms as a source of pigment for paints. The colors are obtained using a simple water extraction process. Although content of the artwork is varied, the most popular themes found in the exhibition are natural scenes, including plant, fungi, and animal life. These paintings and woven tapestries recreate scenes of the forest from where their colors were obtained. The Fourth International Fungi and Fiber Symposium and Exhibition of 1988 was an important milestone in the world of mushroom dyeing. The work presented there was also displayed in the annual mushroom exhibit of the San Francisco Mycological Society at the Coyote Point Museum of San Mateo County. Many more people were introduced to mushrooms as a source of dye, and they spoke with Miriam Rice while admiring the artistic work created with mushroom-dyed yarns. As plans for the next Fungi and Fiber Symposium are made, which will be held in Norway in 1990, an appreciative audience grows, and Miriam's efforts continue to encourage fiber artists to begin using mushrooms for color.
I've done hundreds and hundreds of mushrooms. I've tried them to see whether they have dye potential or not. And with I feel quite good success. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different species of mushrooms in the world. And therefore, there are many that haven't been tried. So who knows, there may be lurking someplace in someone's backyard or woods nearby, one that would be would have hidden in its composition a easily available pigment for someone else to discover. If you're interested, just go out and just try whatever you see. There'll be a lot of them that will not give very much, but there may be that one that just does have an exciting result for you.
Do mushrooms arouse your interest and curiosity? Perhaps the striking array of colorful papers made from fungi will encourage you to begin using mushrooms for papermaking. After all, most everyone has uses for paper, for special notes, for art, calligraphy, and even to make your own book. Here's an ecologically sound way to produce high-quality papers that are unique as they are practical and beautiful. The mushrooms used for paper are polypores, commonly known as shelf mushrooms or conchs, and usually grow on decaying trees and logs. They're also found on living trees, and their decaying effect is an integral part of the life cycle of the forest. Polypores come in many sizes, shapes, and colors, and in dramatic and inspiring configurations. Each species will produce different colors, and the variations in combination are numerous. One of these mushrooms contains the colored powder that was used by Native Americans to paint their faces. Through a process that can be done in any kitchen or studio, the pigment and fiber can be transformed into a brightly colored paper. It is helpful to cut and soak the mushroom to prepare it for papermaking. They can be left in water for a few days, weeks, or months. Some thin species are most easily torn or cut with strong scissors. Others need a saw, hatchet, or knife to reduce them into small pieces. The composition of the polypore has all the important elements for a strong and pliable paper. Water is the only additional ingredient needed in this very simple process. To prepare for blending, water is added, covering the chopped mushrooms. The exact amount is not critical, and more water can be added as needed. The tools for mushroom papermaking are also simple. A blender with a removable bottom is ideal for the next step, as it is easy to use with standard canning jars. Blending the mixture converts the substance into a thick pulp. If the mixture is too thick, it can be divided into additional batches for further thinning. The substance in polypores that makes them suitable for papermaking is chitin, which causes the fiber to expand like a dandelion puff against the sides of the blender. Thus, a small number of mushrooms can make a surprising amount of paper. Depending on the mushroom chosen, blending can take a few moments or some minutes. Whatever time it takes, the consistency of the mushroom blend determines the texture of the finished paper. Although the process has variables, experimentation will quickly yield satisfying results with a blended mixture that can be stored in the refrigerator or used immediately. The pulp is poured into a basin, large enough to accommodate the next process where the paper is formed. Additional water is added to the bath, making a slurry of the appropriate consistency. The amount of added water determines the thickness of the paper, and again, with a little practice, one can gauge the amount of water with no problem. It is important to prepare an absorbent surface to press the paper on. The first layer should be flat and dry newspaper with a piece of towel or woolen blanket on top, covered with a small cotton cloth cut from old sheets. This substitutes for the felt used in traditional papermaking. In preparing the slurry, it is important to mix it using a gentle stirring motion to line up the fibers in one direction. A two-part molding screen or decal is used to pick up the fibers. It is slid under the slurry, held securely together and lifted. This is called couching. The water is drained, leaving a layer of mushroom fibers in the mold. The next step produces the decal edge of handmade paper. The decal frame is taken off the screen and the mold turned over and pressed onto the padding. While holding down the cloth with one hand, it is lifted, leaving the wet paper below. If the mold is not removed cleanly, use a small amount of water to flood the surface of the screen. Most irregularities are easily corrected by hand or in the pressing. To extract the water, a piece of plexiglass or other smooth, flat material is pressed onto the paper. The assembly is turned over and the wet pad is removed. It is important to have quantities of dry blotter, cloth, and newspaper for the drying and pressing process. The wet materials are replaced by layers of additional flat, dry newspaper, and with a second acrylic sheet, the paper is pressed evenly across the surface. Bricks, iron, or heavy books are useful for this part of the process, but a flour or printing press can also be used to squeeze moisture out of the paper. A smooth paper must be dried under pressure, but for a textured piece it is not necessary. After it is pressed for the first time, the cloth needs to be peeled off very carefully and the paper exposed to another series of pressing with newspapers and blotter, plexiglass, and weights. Depending on humidity, the drying and pressing process can be repeated a number of times over a 24-hour period to ensure a paper that is dry and flat. The result is often dramatic. The brightly colored dried mushroom paper is ready to use. Although the papers are light, fast, and durable, they should be stored in a dry place out of direct sunlight. As with mushroom dyes, mushroom papers are produced in an incredible range of colors that blend naturally. There are some variables in the process of mushroom paper making, all of which one can develop with personal preferences in mind. With this new medium of mushroom paper, a growing number of paper makers and artists are being inspired to create forms and images in new dimensions of indisputable beauty.